It gives me great pleasure to have you here tonight and to have this as part of the Wits Business School events. We at the Business School are building ourselves into what will hopefully soon be the best and the #1 business school in Africa. One of the characteristics that underpins everything we do is to ensure that what we teach is people who have critical thinking. You know, we live in a time where change is so rapid that simply to teach content is not good enough. What we need to do is to teach thinking and teach people to think critically and to see around corners. And to this end, another key objective, second key objective that I'd like to talk to very briefly, is the objective of being part of the national debate, where we are involved in subjects that are critical to the importance and the furthering of our society here in South Africa. And tonight's topic falls squarely into the category of an issue that is critical to our success as a society. Public procurement is a major contributor to the economic growth. It also lies at the very center of the public sector's relationship with the rest of society. And given the importance of this subject, it is a great honor to have our State Procurement Officer, Mr Kenneth Brown, with us tonight. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Tommy Mazwai, tonight's convener, to run the sessions. And let's hope we have a wonderful, fascinating debate. Thank you very much.
It's very critical in terms of when we talk about economic growth to bring in new players into the economy on the basis of their creating value than getting 5% or 10% of this and that. I'm not against the 5% and the 10%, but we do need that type of active involvement in the creation of value so that our GDP can continue to grow. Let's get something that is at the heart of what transformation is about, of turning ordinary people into creators of wealth. And I believe that Mr. Brown is very passionate about this.
Now the reality, many countries actually worldwide are now actually looking at establishing these kinds of offices like a chief procurement offices, whether it's in Scotland, whether it's in Ireland. Singapore has been doing this for years, etc. But this got traction because in reality, resources are becoming scarce and people are now starting to think how to better procure some of these services. Where we sit in South Africa, we're faced with the same kind of challenge there, where our revenue is under pressure, our deficits are growing. About four years back, the country's debt stock was standing around 450 billion. Now we are around 1.4 trillion, if you think about it. So given that rise actually out there, we're sitting and saying, but how do we work smartly so that we accelerate delivery, but also put the brakes actually on these perpetual deficits actually going forward? So that's the challenge that we are faced with. But even with that, we're also faced with a challenge where poverty continues to grow. Unemployment is a problem. The president talks about it forever, right? So we're faced with that kind of reality. And given growing poverty, there's a greater pressure actually on the fiscus to deliver services. Coupled with that, and which possibly will form a big crux of today's conversation, is the issue around growing economic inequality. It's a fact that 80 or plus % of the wealth of the country belongs to the white minority. How do we use public procurement smartly to be able to think about an entry point to start to address that imbalance? So David Cameron in the UK says, you know, after 2007-8, there's only one thing worse than spending money you don't have, and that's buying the wrong things with it and doing so in the wrong way. And it's true for all of us, right? Given the growing deficits, the growing debt stock, we need to think smartly now that we are really under pressure. Now, what needs to change in South African public procurement? Firstly, malicious compliance, where people just think, oh, the Treasury wants this thing, let's just give it to the Treasury. Whether it makes sense or not, let's just do it, right? Non-compliance actually needs to change. Yeah. The other area where we've looked into is our skill set, and how do we actually build the capacity of people to be able to manage supply chain. In the Eastern Cape, just to give you an example, there's over 3,000 centers in health where procurement decision and activity actually takes place. That's only in one province, in one health department. So you ask yourself, do you need that kind of fragmentation and decentralization? So we need to think about many of these things. The Dean alluded to something earlier on and said there's this issue around the political economy of procurement. It is an issue. Then there's the issue around accountability. The Auditor General raises a number of issues, rightly or wrongly, around failures, and bulk of those failures are in supply chain. But have anybody been fired, disciplined around that? Who's held accountable for that? It's open to debate. It's a problem. Transparency. If I were to ask, do we know what this, let's say, Eskom's acquisition plan for the next 5 years? You wouldn't know, even if you were to go onto their website. The only time that we will know about that is when there's a tender that basically goes out. So is that the way to manage procurement? Maybe not. If you take an accounting officer of a department, I need to ask the accounting officer of a department, and we're asking them the question now. What are the secondary objectives of procurement? They need to start to say, look, I need to use some of my procurement for empowerment, whether it's women, people with disabilities, to address inequality, and basically so you go, right? But for them to be able to do that, they need to understand what it is that they purchase themselves. And then they need to have a list of those commodities that, or even categories of those commodities that they will be purchasing, and start to strategize actually around it and say, which parts do we use to empower? Which parts can't we use to empower? But even the parts that we can't use to empower, how do we, in a limited way, use that basically to empower? So there's an issue around demand planning. I mean, the question that I've asked, whether any entity has got acquisition plans that are known, properly organized for the next 3 to 5 years, is a serious question. Because where you sit, let's say you're part of the private sector, you must gear up for what government is going to purchase. How will you gear up if you don't know what government is going to be purchasing over a period of time? An important thing that we often neglect, and this is where we actually partly get it wrong as government, we forget that we've got suppliers. It's business that must actually provide the stuff, because we don't make the stuff. But in everything that we do, we forget about these guys. How do they experience us? What is it that we need to do to change, to make it easier for them to transact basically with us? In conclusion, here is, how do we change this environment so that it becomes an enabling environment for transacting? That's where we are actually in space. But this responsibility is not my responsibility and my office's responsibility. It is actually each and every individual within those 660 or so government entities' is a responsibility to make sure that supply chain actually works. So it's a long journey that we are actually, so there's no quick fix. If people think that we're going to get quick solutions for this thing, they must dream and dream again on that, because the journey is going to be quite a bit of a long journey. But ultimately, all of us, my team, very positive, and with the support of many of my colleagues, if not all within the public sector, I think we will be able to walk that particular kind of journey. And the partnerships that we actually want to foster, even with our tertiary institutions, with business, is going to be part of that kind of journey. Then I hope to be able to be in a position to take all of you along on that particular journey. Thank you, Dr. Muzwai, and thank you, everybody.
My name is Fantas. I'm chairing State-Owned Enterprise Procurement Forum. I worked for approximately 5 SOEs. Therefore, I know much about procurement. But central to this is triple PFA, which is a Provincial Act policy, where they talk about 90-10, 80-20, which in summary, the anecdote of a bottle, that we can buy a bottle at any rate, good price, but you know, if you buy a bottle, you need to say, if you're a head of procurement, you need to say, how many bottles are we buying? Can we create factories in South Africa to create employment and buy that bottle, rather than to import that bottle? Therefore, the triple PFA says, look at the price. you'll get the bottle. Don't care where it comes from. And that's where I think it totally, nullify this developmental vision we have. The center-led, which I'm supporting, not centralization, but obviously it could be semantics to people who are not in procurement. I believe and support it. You can't have different departments buying differently a paper at Monty or a paper of Sapi at a different price. But also if it's the government, you go there and put a package to say what are your transformational agendas, what is your price. You come in with economies of scale. When you buy, you use economies of scale. And then you can change anything you want. It's an instrument to buy.
The primary objective of procurement as being to get value for money for the state, while at the same time transforming and growing the economy. We're very clear, growing the economy and transforming the economy must not be the secondary objective. They must be captured in that primary objective, getting value for money for the state, which we support absolutely, while growing the economy and while transforming the economy. The state's capacity to execute is very limited. It's not shooting down at the state, not at all. But I think everybody knows that the state is just unable to do things within time, at the right cost, and at the right quality. The bridge will be promised it will be done at 100 million rands, and by the time the ribbon is cut, it will have cost 2 billion rands. Use centralized procurement. A cynical mind may say you potentially centralize corruption, and it can become massive. The setting up of a centralized chief procurement officer's office is not a panacea to phenomenal challenges that we face as a country. The biggest elephant in the room is the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act number 5 of 2000, which is colloquially called PPFA. We believe that this act is contrary to the objective of transforming the economy in the holistic sense, and specifically in terms of effecting and deepening black economic empowerment. So, in summary, we are enemies of the PPFA. We believe it doesn't assist, and as a matter of priority, the Chief Procurement Officer must consider this matter as a matter of agency, not because of BEE, because we have to save this economy of South Africa. Thank you.
So if I were to unpack it for you, excluding our public entities, you're talking close to 500 billion.
500 billion.
Yes. Right? Ed?
500 billion.
Now in there, if you were to take a housing program, 95% of housing programs are driven by black contractors. Where I agree with Sandile is skills is a problem. Because part of the skill is to say, what is it that I'm going to buy, from who am I going to buy, and the people that I'm going to buy, what percentage of those I'm going to empower, and if I empower them today, where do I see them in 5 or 10 years' time? Basically there. When you go to local government spends about over 280 billion collectively, actually, in total. There, in their case, their spending on procurement would be half of that as well, given that the rest will actually go to personnel. Even in there, our surveys have started to show us that close to 80% of that procurement goes to our black entrepreneurs. Right? So we have come to the conclusion that there may be problems with the PPFA, but it's not the sole problem in empowerment. What are the other factors that are actually playing a role? Actually, I don't want to be seen to be defending the PPFA. It needs to be reviewed, and the process is actually underway. But with that, we need to hold our hands actually together and be transparent in the way in which we review it. On centralization, let me explain this thing quickly. Where we sit, we do the negotiation nationally, but we don't do the purchasing nationally. Let me give you an example. We've got a transversal contract for cars, right? In fact, we're getting those cars at less than about 20% cheaper than what you will get them when you buy them in the dealership, right? But the decision to then purchase the car is the department's decision, but at the given price, because we have already negotiated a price. So we will not be, actually, if you think about it, we will not be centralizing even the decision to buy the actual thing and go and actually deliver there.
So the failure to describe appropriately and succinctly what you are looking for, and to spend more time. As an engineer, I was told if you spend sufficient time on planning, there won't be failures. If you rush and you don't do proper planning, there will be a lot of rejects and you have to do a lot of repair work. So this thing of procurement planning lies at the core of the state functionaries' reluctance, ultimately, once the service is delivered and the product is supplied, to say, it's not the right quality. Did you describe what quality you wanted in the first place? So the fact of the matter is that economic transformation, which was one of the key objectives of the Reconstruction and Development Program, a key objective of all sorts of documents that emerge from the state, including the National Development Plan, has not really succeeded. That's why, among others, we're saying, how can the state utilize its procurement capacity to leverage and to create levers for empowerment to be deepened?